tonight. That'll be the 12th and the 19th. That'll end the sessions here on faith in the founding Bible and the Constitution. If you have not already figured that out, if this has prompted you to do some of your own research, I know that it gets kind of cliché to say we've just simply scratched the surface, but that's all we've done with this. We're in our 9th session. We'll have 11 total, but still, it is a mammoth study to engage yourself in. Hopefully, it has been. I've learned a whole lot of things myself that I thought I had a fairly good handle on the Constitution and so forth, and realized I didn't know much at all. So that'll be 2 more weeks, next Wednesday the 12th and the 19th. And for Grace Church folks, we will have 2 weeks off. That'll be 26th of August and the 2nd of September. That's Labor Day week. And then we will resume School of Ministry on Wednesday, September the 9th. So for those of you who have been engaged with us over all these weeks of the Constitution, if you might be interested in that, we have a functioning School of Ministry here to equip the saints. We are very pro Ephesians 4. Evangelists, pastors, prophets, teachers, and pastors and apostles that do something. They equip saints to do ministry, the Ephesians 4 model. So that is a huge value for us here. We're also connected with Aiden University. So our courses will count as credit if you wanted to go ahead with further education. We have some who are doing that, working on degrees. Most of our people just take the courses on an audit basis, just simply for their own benefit. You're welcome to do that. If you're interested in that, our schedule for 20 and 21 and what we're doing in the School of Ministry, again, office at gcotv.org. And they can connect you. We'll connect you with Dr. Don Allen, who heads up our school and can answer the questions. And you can go to our website as well, too. But if you connect with us, office at gcotv.org, we'll give you the information. And I think you'll be blessed. Amen. I think that's it, admin-wise. Let's jump in tonight and try to look at this, what we're titling tonight, Freedom's Genesis. This is, I can't take any credit for this. This is taken from a book by Dr. Os Guinness that I've recommended early in this, maybe the first or second week. A book called The Last Call for Freedom, How America's Genius is, I forget what the last part of the title is, How America's Genius has become its greatest threat. Certainly what has happened over the course of the last few months with this whole trauma with COVID and what mayors and governors are doing, certainly early on prompted me, I guess I would say kind of the final straw to say I'm going to really feel strong to do something on the Constitution. But in terms of freedom and liberty, it was already spawning in me. This book that we're going to look at, actually from the first chapter of this book tonight, I bought probably a year, maybe a year and a half ago. I was on Amazon, which is a dangerous thing for me to do, but I'm trying to get delivered, but not very hard. So I was on there looking at something, and Dr. Guinness's book popped up, this one that we're using tonight and I'm recommending. Now, I'll say I've had the book for probably a year, maybe a little longer than that. I may be a quarter of the way through it. It's just, you can't just, I'm going to flip through this thing and there you go. His doctorate is from Oxford, so he's a really smart guy. But he is a brilliant theologian and brilliant philosopher and very conservative in his viewpoint. So I kind of equate him like Tocqueville, who we've referenced quite a bit during this, especially the early weeks. Tocqueville was French. He came to the United States 50, 60 years after the Constitution, began to look at the United States and gave his assessment of what made us great, but looking from outside eyes. Guinness is a British, he may be a U.S. citizen now, but he comes from Britain. So if I could just sum up the book, what I've gotten through it so far, which is only about a quarter of it, it is, I'm not sure you Americans know what you have, and I'm certainly not sure whether you have any idea that you're about to lose it. So that pretty much sums up the book, The Last Call for Freedom. I had mentioned a couple of times in the earlier sessions that we were going to talk about some of the, from the Old Testament standpoint, we're going to try to look at that tonight, at least, again, hate using the term scratch the surface, but that's essentially all we're going to be able to do on this. Again, when folks try to tell us that it was written, the Constitution is an irreligious or non-religious document, the framers, the founders were irreligious, non-religious, Gnostic, or not Gnostic, but deist men, is just not true. It's just simply not true. So we're going to look at a kind of the 30,000-foot level tonight as it relates to Sinai and the exodus of the children of Israel and how that, again, equates with us. The Declaration of Independence is not only an American document, it follows on the Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights as the third great title deed in which the liberties of the English-speaking people are founded. That's Churchill. Churchill, in my mind, was one of the three greatest leaders of the 20th century. He was being taken through Old Williamsburg, and they were talking about the revolution. He said, nay, it was not a revolution. Of course, he's Brit. He said it was just the British people continuing with their British freedom, or something to that effect. Then he went, and then he said this quote that I've got there for you in the notes. The revolutionaries felt they were being oppressed by King George. There were a myriad of things. It's not just taxation without representation. David Barton says he puts that about 16 or 17, I think, in terms of the importance. It was a whole lot of things other than just that. But in truth, they were fighting against some of the freest people in the world. They were fighting against some of their own brethren, as it were, the freest people in the world, the British. Remember, these are Englishmen over here, right? By and large. Fighting against some of the freest people in the world, they believed that freedom was their birthright as Englishmen. So they're warring against probably the freest people in the world then, the British, but their freedom here in terms of its existence with King George and so on was not what they believed it should be. John Adams stated, the patriots of the province desire nothing new. Interesting statement. The patriots of the province desire nothing new. They wish only to keep their old privileges that, again, they would have had as Englishmen and women, again, with the exception of the control of the church that dictated to them. What did Adams mean by that statement? Those ancient liberties included the common law, the right of habeas corpus, trial by jury, not trial by jury, of one's peers, elected parliaments, taxation by consent, safeguards for property, and above all, the notion of government by consent. Government by consent. Underline that, underscore it. We're going to talk more about that later. King Edward I said, what touches all should be approved by all. Government by consent. What touches all should be approved by all. Once again, you do realize that for the most part, what these men and women, it may be all well-intended. Their hearts, they may think their hearts are right on this, mayors and governors, but for the vast majority of the things they are doing are not legal. They're not. I don't care how well-intended they think they are, they're not legal. It is not that touches all is certainly not being approved by all. As a matter of fact, it's not being approved by many at all. Most of them in regards of a mayor, a governor, and a health department point person, and that's it. So the literal meaning, if you're not familiar with your days in habeas corpus, because somebody's probably going to ask me that, so I thought I better have this down for you. You know what it literally means? Habeas corpus means you shall have the body. That's what the literal meaning of habeas corpus is, the actual wording. Here's what it means, though, in terms of judicial basis. That is, the judge must have the person charged with a crime brought into the courtroom to hear what he's been charged with. In other words, habeas corpus rights is you've got to take me into the court and tell me why I'm being, what's wrong. And if you can't tell me what's wrong from a legal standpoint, what law I've broken, then you've got to let me go. That's the writ, W-R-I-T, of habeas corpus. That was all free of charge. Probably didn't care that you even knew that, but I figured somebody would ask me, so. Do Americans truly realize where their freedom comes from? I think not. That was kind of, again, the thesis of this chapter in Guinness's book. So here's the principle. The story of freedom is essential and foundational to the maintaining of that freedom. When we lose sight, in other words, when we lose sight of the story of the freedom and its foundational component, then maintaining it's going to be very, very difficult. And we're facing that right now. A forgotten key to understanding the forgotten contribution of the Jews and Mount Sinai and the way in which both built on and decisively advanced the ancient liberties of the English. I know that's a mouthful, how that would connect when we look at Mount Sinai, the exodus of the Jews out of Egypt, what that meant to English liberties, and then in turn what it meant to the founders and framers of our Constitution. So, in his book, he talks about the great gift of the Jews. The youngest son at the Seder meal, what that is, the Passover meal, the youngest son will ask this question every time. Why does this night mean more than any of the other nights? It is the prompting for the father to tell the Exodus story again, which they do every time they visit again the Seder meal as that Jewish custom. What makes this night any different than the other 364 nights? It's asked by the youngest child during the Seder meal, provokes the retelling of the Exodus story. And listen, it is history's most successful retelling of history. No people have ever, in all the time before or after, have ever experienced anything like they did. And the whole point of this is that maybe the closest to that is us. Again, that's Guinness's point. Certainly he's not trying to necessarily equate it to the divine aspect of what happened with the Mount Sinai and the exodus out of Egypt, but there are parallels. And the founders and the framers saw parallels. Daniel Elazar, Michael Walzer, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and others have argued that the book of Exodus is the master story of Western freedom and ultimate regime change in history. So they say, as scores of others, if you want to know about freedom, how it came to England, how it came to the United States, look at Exodus and the freedom of the Jews out of Egypt. In a Thanksgiving sermon in 1799, Abiel Abbott spoke for many Americans of his generation when he said, "It has often been remarked that the people of the United States come nearer to the parallel with the ancient Israel than any other nation upon the globe." Years later, the poet Heinrich Heine expanded on this idea when he said, "Since the Exodus, freedom has always spoken with a Hebrew accent." Interesting, in something I was studying last week, I'd never, read this in the early days of reading this book by Os Guinness, but I'd not heard of this Heinrich Heine. But just this past week, his name popped up in something I was studying. He made an interesting comment. Well, I think it was in, take that back, it was in Mario Murillo's writing, I think. Heine, who's a German poet, said, "Always remember, when they begin to burn your books, they will next burn the people." And he said that in, I think, 1850. So long before what happened in Germany with the ovens, but he prophesied that nearly 100 years before. When they begin to burn your books, realize they will next begin to burn people. And we know what happened last weekend. I told you that, right? In Portland, they stacked up scores and scores and scores of Bibles and burnt them. Exodus was certainly the key to the American Revolution and the American revolutionaries. But it was more than just some kind of a template for personal salvation. I wish I had more time here, but I don't have. I don't want to veer too far off in terms of just theology, but salvation, while it must be personal, individual, it was never just to be personal, individual. Right. We're skewed way out of whack in the American church. I mean, way out of whack. My personal to be called, if you hear me when we have folks come to Jesus Christ, I said, listen, you got to understand something. Let me give these three things that are important to you. You need to find yourself, you need to talk to God. This prayer. We'll get you a Bible if you don't have one that's you can understand. And you need to be ingrained in the local church, because when you were called to Christ, you were called to the family. And the framers understood that as Franklin said, we're either going to hang together on this or we're all going to hang by the end of the rope separately. So they took that understanding certainly to the Constitution. And we have lost that. Certainly we've lost that from the standpoint of the Constitution in our country and the culture, but we've lost that in the church as well too. Where we say, well, it's just my individual salvation, my commitment to Jesus Christ, and that's, if it doesn't really have any bearing, if much at all, to the rest of it. As long as I'm tracking right with God, it's okay. Well, no, it's not. That was not ever to be the case. It was never to be the case. And from a standpoint of a society framing a democratic republic, our founders understood that. So it was not just a template for some personal salvation. So it was not just about, again, you picture, everybody with the Exodus picture, right? Out of Egypt they go. Blood on the posts. Death angel passes over. They're spared. Out they go with the golden riches of Egypt. But it was not just a personal thing. But I get that. They were delivered as a nation, as a people. So not just personal salvation or merely emotional rhetoric. Let my people go. Proclaim liberty throughout the land. Exodus 5:1 and Leviticus 25:10 are where those come from. Again, understand, if you have his book, Original Intent, one that I would certainly advise you to get, he has a couple of pages of paragraphs where events in the writing takes certain segments of the Constitution, says, here's where those came from. Again, I wish I had more time, but we just don't have time to delve into all those. So very interesting from that standpoint as well, too. The Jewish Exodus provides a template for society, for human personhood, for freedom, etc. Listen, liberty is more than liberation. Now, we're seeing this, and I'm completely free, so I can come and burn stuff down. I can throw stuff at police officers. I can shoot lasers at them, and so on. Why? Because that would be their understanding of complete freedom. And right now, for the most part, they're suffering no consequences of that, right? So if you ask any of these young people primarily, would you define that as freedom? Well, sure, freedom. Now, the founders would not have looked at that as freedom. They would look at that as it should be named. And again, not the peaceful assembly. That's given to us in the first one. They can do that, and you can disagree with what they're doing, but if they do it peaceably and gather, then they have every right under the Constitution to do that. They do not have a right, however, to start shooting lasers at men and women and throwing bottles at them and bricks at them and burning down buildings and burning police cars. It points to the rule of law. Liberty is more than liberation. It points to the rule of law, the consent of the governed, the responsibility of rights, the separation of powers, transformative servant leadership, the primacy of a personal over the political, and on and on. Now, let's delve into for a second here. The Sinai Covenant, at the heart of it was at the heart of the Exodus story, came to America with the English and put its stamp on it. American history, through its decisive contribution to the U.S. Constitution and the notion of constitutionalism. So again, drawing from the Exodus and the children of Israel. There are four major types of societies based on their founding rather than on their types of government. This is very interesting. Four types of societies based on their founding rather than their types of government. Number one, organic societies. These are societies that are linked by blood, kinship, ancestral ties. Scottish clans. Remember the movie Braveheart? They were, any number of clans, right, in the Scottish that had a ruler over that clan. And remember that he was trying to get these clan leaders to bring their clans together as one force to do what? Come against Great Britain. We saw that pretty firsthand when we were in Kenya last year, where I certainly didn't know. There are some 32 or 33 tribes in Kenya. And our hosts, Pastor Joseph and Grace, were absolutely transparently honest. They said, listen, if you want to see racism, you can watch it here while we're all black. So they understood full well. Joseph and Grace, the couple who are friends of Boniface, who hosted us for this 2 weeks, Joseph is from the largest and most powerful tribe of Kenya. Their president, Kenyatta, now president of Kenyatta, is from that same tribe. His wife, Grace, is from a lower tribe. And I said, any big deal about that? And they went, oh, man, you talk about a big deal. Shouldn't have been married because of his tribe and her tribe. So it wasn't even looked on very favorably. So I said, that's when I brought it. I said, that sounds a little racist. He said, and he laughed and he said, you Americans, you haven't seen nothing. Because here's my viewpoint. You're all African. You're all Kenyans. Not so. Not so. That's a society linked by blood, kinship, or ancestral ties. So Scottish clans being an example, African tribes, again, scores of others, but those are two kind of prominent ones. Those are organic societies. Two hierarchical societies. These are societies that are linked by force and conquest, such as kingdoms and empires. The British Empire in its heyday would certainly be the Roman Empire. Chinese communism today, that is a hierarchical society. You have very, very wealthy men and women there. There just aren't many of them. They are connected with the ruling entity there. Same thing in Russia. It's the aspect of, we'll democracy. It's not democratic republic where you just continue to get a vote. We'll vote. It's one man, one time, and then there you go. Like Putin is now, I think he's instilled himself as kind of the president forever, right? Chinese, Xi has. They've rewritten everything now. He is now an emperor, as it were. Saying it's essentially a democrat. Well, it's not. And only the cronies around him who are getting extremely wealthy, and everybody else has to hammer out some things. Divisions, classes, and castes are usually a feature of such societies. That is a hierarchical. I'll get it out. Let me just move on. Number three, contractual societies. These are societies based on a series of legal contracts that serve the interests of the citizens and allow for politics that promotes the pursuit of self-interest. We've certainly gravitated to that one here, that promote the pursuit of self-interest. I got an email today. I'll leave the senators' names out, but 2004, who passed the very important drug act that gave the pass on liability on vaccines. All of them, 39 of them that it mentioned, 38, Democrat and Republican, by the way, not just Democrat and Republican, most of whom held major chunks of pharmaceutical stock. Imagine that. Some made millions just on that one sign-off on that bill. The framers would recoil at that. They would recoil at that. And finally, number 4, and this is the framework of our founders. That's a covenantal society. They're linked by choice and binding agreement, such as ancient Israel after the Sinai covenant and the United States after rejecting the Articles of Confederacy and passing the U.S. Constitution in 1787. If Lincoln, they're talking about, he's talking about Abraham Lincoln, Eleazar and Walser, the Jewish folks, are right. Americans are not simply an almost chosen people. They live in an almost covenanted polity, and they were the heirs of the Jewish almost democracy. So again, here's Jewish folk and Abraham Lincoln that believe our formation as a nation was always the closest to what happened with the Jews in their exodus out of Egypt. The unique components of the covenant, speaking of the Sinai covenant now, that God cuts with the children of Israel. First, God himself was a partner to the covenant, even though he was the sovereign king in relation to the subordinate king, the people of Israel. That had never been seen before, where the king, and in this case, the king of all kings, the creator king, enters into a partnership with humankind. Second, the covenant included all the people of Israel, men, women, children, both the born and the yet to be born. That's a whole other issue there as well, too. Speak to the entire assembly of Israel and say to them, speak to the entire assembly of Israel and say to them, Leviticus 19, 1 and 2. Michael Walzer states the agreement is wholesale. All the people accept all the laws, and the result is an almost democracy. Again, our framers believe that while you would have heated discussion, the question came up, I think Ryan had a question last week about the two-party system. Well, in effect, they had a two-party system to begin with, the Whigs and the Tories. That was their essence of the beginning of our formation. But as they did in that 100 days in the Constitutional Convention, they argued vehemently with one another. And Franklin said, man, we've got to pray. Let's pray, because this is getting out of hand here. They started every day with prayer, but then I guess it would get out of hand at times over the arguments about what should be included, what not should be, what shouldn't be included, how you would frame it, how you would do it. But in the end, they came together. That's how they viewed it, that we'll have heated discussion and your point and your point, and we're going to listen, and finally we'll agree. Now, that's foreign to us now. On both sides of the aisle, not to both sides, it is about winning points. So now they're screaming at one another about if it's going to be $3.2 trillion is what the Democrats want in this next package, relief package. The Republicans are saying $1 trillion. It's just amazing how they throw these numbers around. Well, it's just $1 trillion here and $1 trillion there. We're already $32 or $33 trillion now in debt now. So it is winning points for your constituency, winning points and the framers didn't see that. They saw, again, this wholesale, all people accept all the laws, and the result is an almost democracy. We're going to work this out. We're going to have disagreements about what ought to be done and not be done, but in the final analysis, our job is to come together, in this case, our men and women in legislature, and say, this is what we're going to do for the good of the country. The principle stands in stark contrast to most of the treaties of then and unfortunately now. The norm in an agreement at that point in time would have been two individuals, normally a sovereign king with a subordinate king. I'm not going to wipe you out and all your people wiped out, but here's the agreement we're going to agree to. We're going to stop fighting with one another, but here are the terms of the agreement. So get it again, that was not what happened with this one. God, the creator of the universe, enters into agreement with the people. This binding agreement ties together the past, the present, and the future to form a live tradition that links generations. So that's all part of that number 2. Number 3, the Articles of the Sinai Covenant covered the whole of life, so that freedom was not just a moment of liberation, but a people's way of life for generations. Again, I hope you see that in what the framers were trying to do out of the chute here with the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and so on. It was not just the severing of the control of Great Britain and King George. It was framing an entirely new democratic republic and a completely new way of life. Now, the great precedent and pattern. First, the covenant was a matter of freely chosen consent. 3 separate times the Jewish people were asked for their response, and they answered, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And they answered with one voice, Exodus 19, verse 8, and chapter 24, verses 3 and 7. In other words, they ratified the covenant voluntarily. Were not coerced. They didn't ratify the covenant at the end of a sword or at the barrel of a gun, or now certainly other techniques that so much in government seems to do. There's no legitimate government without the consent of the governed. It is an illegitimate government, no matter what you call it, if it does not have the consent of the governed, even if the governor is the creator of the universe, as was the case with the Sinai covenant. The result is probably a new word for us, excuse me, is for me, a nomocracy. That is the freely chosen rule of God rather than a theocracy, the direct rule of God. Hopefully I've said this enough times over the weeks. When people say, you want a theocracy, no, we don't want a theocracy. The framers of the Constitution, the founders, never wanted a theocracy. That was not their intent. Theocracy is the direct rule of God. And again, as I mentioned, you have that in Saudi Arabia, and you have it in Iran, as well as other places. That's a theocracy. Second, the covenant was a matter of a morally binding pledge. It is this moral component that makes a covenant different from a contract. A political covenant stronger than a social contract, and a covenant of marriage before God deeper and more lasting than a civil marriage. Wedlock, how many of you heard all the jokes about wedlock? They get his groomsmen and folks at the wedding go, and you are tied down now, Jack. You've lost all your freedom and it's gone, right? That word has nothing to do with that. Wedlock is an Old English term, compound word, wed, W-D, or pledge, and the word lack, L-A-C, or gift, so that marriage was the freely given pledge of love. That's what wedlock means, a pledge of love. Not, again, not this binding contract kind of thing. I've given this example before. I don't cheat on my wife because we have a marriage certificate somewhere in a file, right? No, it's because of a relationship with a person. So I don't feel obligated to do or not do things in relationship to my walk with Jesus Christ because I'm married to a person, Jesus. It's not about how far can I go here against the edge and not sin completely and fall off a cliff. What a horrible way to live, you know, as a supposed believer. No, it's because of a passionate relationship with him. That's, the picture of wedlock, pledge, and a gift, so that marriage is a freely given pledge of love. That component was in the picture at Sinai and is a part of what the framers desired to have as us in the nation as well, too. So in this covenant promise is both the expression of freedom and an assumption of responsibility. So it's not just, again, if young people, middle-aged people, old people do not see the responsibility of this freedom we possess, then we're off the rails, right? So it's not just the expression of freedom and an assumption of, it has to be also the assumption of responsibility. So people who covenant, whether in marriage or in nation building, and certainly that was the case with the framing of our nation, was covenant skewed, a covenant society, make a morally informed and morally binding mutual pledge to each other that creates trust. Again, you had 50 plus men in that constitutional convention who had varying differences of what they thought would be right, where they're, 53, 52 of them came from religious background, so they certainly had some measure of religious framework for them, but they still were coming from different backgrounds. You had South Carolina viewing one thing, and New York viewing another thing, and Massachusetts viewing another thing, and North Carolina seeing something else. And it was, if we do not see it as divine, and if you delve very, very deeply into, especially more and more of the writings of the founders and the framers, they believed, certainly didn't equate what they did in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. They didn't put that at the level of the Bible, but they did believe that what happened in and through them was divine. They firmly believed that. They believed that God's, as Franklin kept saying, the providence of God, the providence of God, the providence of God. They believed God's hand was working through them. So they were, because of that and other reasons, they were able to put aside a lot of the differences that they had. And listen, they still had, once they walked out of that convention, those didn't go away. But they said, listen, we're cutting a covenant today. And our hope is that the states, because remember we talked about a few weeks ago, the states had to ratify that covenant. That's why you largely had the now I'm drawing a blank. The 53 or 54, it'll come to me. No, what Hamilton and Jay and Federalist Papers, yeah, all the Federalists were, they said, Adams and primarily, but Hamilton as well too. Here's what we're saying with this, because remember they needed 9 of those states to ratify this, or it wasn't going to happen. But when they came out of the Constitutional Convention, they wanted all 13 of the states. Next week, I think we're going to talk about states. That's all screwed up as well, too. I mean, that's fundamentally screwed up here. When you read where the separation of the from Great Britain, and it talks about states, we think states, Oregon, Missouri, Kentucky, North Carolina. They saw state as a sovereign entity. We'll get into that next week. Jumping ahead of myself. And we've just flat relinquished. We've relinquished that. Send us money, oh great Washington, and we'll help dispense it and do what you ask us to do. It was never that. Remember we said last week, the duties of the federal government were few and well-defined. The duties of the state were innumerable, and that's turned itself on its head over a number of years. Here's the significance of the Pledge of Allegiance and of the standing during the national anthem. Get this. This is coming from a British guy. That America needs to recapture and that those who take a knee need to remember. Both are a solemn commitment to the American Republic's obligation on behalf of liberty and justice for all. Well, again, it says, first, we have the right of dissent. We have that, but dissent from the pledge and disrespect for the anthem are a tacit rejection of the covenant and the Constitution itself. So they see it one way. I'm not sure exactly how they see much of it, but here's what Dr. Guinness says. It's a tacit rejection of the covenant and Constitution. Dissent from them in the name of justice is contradictory and self-defeating. In other words, what he's saying, your dissent in this matter is self-defeating. Not accomplishing anything that you think it should be accomplishing, you want it to be accomplishing. For it undermines the very standard and obligation through which justice in America is to be achieved. Interesting that a guy with different set of eyes who comes here sees it pretty clearly. Number three, or the third, the covenant was a matter of reciprocal responsibility for all, of all, for all. It included, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, and it reached out in care for the widow, the orphan, and even the stranger. Love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt, Deuteronomy 10:19. Watch this now. The reciprocal responsibility even included the rights of the future, for its terms covered not only the born, but the unborn and the yet to be born. The Lord did not make this covenant with our fathers, but with us, with all of us alive here today, Deuteronomy 5. Did not make this covenant with our fathers, but with us, with all of us alive here today. Rabbi Hillel was asked if he could explain the essence of Judaism while standing on one leg. I don't know why they asked him to do that, but I guess trying to be a little bombastic or something. He replied that nothing could be simpler. Do unto others as you will have others do unto you. The rest is commentary. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and everything else is just commentary. Rabbi Sachs put it this way: a covenant is a pledge between two or more partners, each of whom respects the freedom and integrity of the other, to be loyal to one another, and to do together what neither can do alone. What neither can do alone. There's the essence of marriage, the marriage covenant, It should be, again, at the core of what we do as a nation, what we cannot do singularly and alone, and all the way to the church, what we cannot do alone. What I can't do, what you can't do alone, it takes, and a covenant pledge is that. When we talk about, when we discuss it, when folks go through the doorway class, I will always say this, listen, and we've got Barry and others who've gone through that just over the last couple of weeks. I will always say this at the very beginning of a doorway class. I have no interest in names on a roll. I don't care one flip about that. Not one, nothing, zero, nada, net. Don't care one thing about that. That's all just religious. Now, do you care about people becoming a part of the covenant group? Oh, yeah, that's a big deal there. But not about numbers on a roll. That's of no interest whatsoever. But people who are, and if you understand covenant, I will say normally something like this. You don't take this lightly. We don't take it lightly as a church, and boy, you should take it lightly. There are a handful of major decisions that you'll make in life. We have to make decisions every day. You know, what we're going to do here, if you're in business, or you're going to have to make a myriad of decisions maybe today, but you won't make a handful of major decisions in life. Who you marry. If you have a job opportunity that says it's going to take you to Sacramento, California, that's a pretty big decision, right? You better get the mind of God on that. And as our friend who was just with us on Sunday, he would say, Doc Barkley would always say, when they would come to him, so I've got this opportunity, atypically that'll be job related, and I'm going to move to, I could move to Charlotte or wherever. He would say, where are you going to go to church? Because I don't know. He said, you better figure that out first. He said, I'm not telling you this may be a divinely orchestrated open door for you that you may need to take. He said, that's not my point. But you better find out where God's putting you there first. Then take care of the other stuff when you. So it's, again, if you view it as covenant, not just the membership roles. Again, back to the church aspect, I'm not sure we understand that to the degree we should. So they believed this was a covenant that they'd entered into and to be carried out. The question, can it be said today that all Americans are responsible for all Americans? Remember what the one brother said in Genesis, am I my brother's keeper? And the answer is yes. But when we see again that we're not responsible for all Americans, responsible for all Americans, individualism has swallowed us up as a culture, as a people, and all too often as believers as well. I would encourage you to get that book because we got about halfway through the first chapter. So there's a whole lot more in just this first one on the origin of freedom, or I think he titles it, Do Americans Really Know Where Their Freedom Comes From? And his thesis is they do not. So, got you out a little bit early. Let's pray. Father, again, as we've prayed over the course of these weeks, Lord, it's not just so we glean some more information and file it away in our filing cabinet or the filing cabinet of our brain, but to help us that revelation comes that no matter how small a part we think we can play or that we may not be able to play any part, I pray, Lord, that we don't see that. That we, as we have in this room tonight, we have individuals who are in politics in this room here, others that feel they are called to that arena. that they are equipped and being equipped, and we need them at every single solitary level to change from the council area to the county representatives to mayors to state senators to governors and on and on and on. And I pray, Lord, that right now we're seeing the absolute importance of that. It's not just presidential elections and senators and congressmen and women. It is at every level the importance of who is helping steer the ship. Help us not only, Father, to be great citizens, but to be able to communicate that to seeking people. I think there are folks that just simply, they're not trying to be anti, they're not trying to be crosswise, they just simply don't know. Nobody's ever helped them to understand. And we can help them by not trying to win an argument, but by telling them the truth and helping explain to them what the idea that our founding fathers had and what the great Constitution and this glorious, wonderful experiment was to be. So help us in that regard, Father, that we can play, every single solitary one of us, a part, even though it may be a small one. And Lord, I pray over them that the folks here tonight and those watching by way of live streaming, that the rest of this week will be one of divine opportunities, divine appointments, that the kingdom will be seen in and through them, the life and love and power of Jesus Christ and the wonder of his Holy Spirit exhibited through these folks to scores of individuals before we gather again this Sunday. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks, guys.